Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your leave, I am pleased to fulfill my sacred duty as a member of this honorable House in making my contribution to the 2022 budget debate. I pray for the day when our women and girls can be treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. I refuse to be silenced. I begin my presentation, of course, by thanking the many public servants and other stakeholders who contributed to putting this budget together. And I continue to give thanks to Almighty God for this beautiful gift of life, for health, strength, and the opportunity to serve the people of Guyana. In my presentation today, Mr. Speaker, I will touch on the programs and initiatives in the education sector being advanced by the government of Guyana. I will propose the coalition's recommendations on how these can be adapted to better deliver to the needs of all of our learners, thereby improving performance across all levels. Mr. Speaker, most notably absent in this year's budget is the mention of any specific intervention to address the learning losses brought on by the pandemic. I don't know anyone who would agree that the disruption to the education system occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic would have created learning gaps that absolutely need to be bridged. Unprecedented times, Mr. Speaker, calls for unprecedented solutions. The routine of the past, as captured in the 2022 budget, is unlikely to be adequate. I have to say that a structured, thoughtful approach to covering missed content and providing interventions and remediations will help our students catch up. And I believe carefully managing resources will also help to fuel that effort. Mr. Speaker, in looking at Budget 2022, I noticed headlines such as improved school building infrastructure, improving access through cash grants, textbooks, science kits, etc. And these are routine measures which are important and which we are accustomed to here in Guyana, but which by themselves cannot provide the transformational shifts required to rebound the sector, especially during and after the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, from the numerous analyses done locally and beyond, a number of areas were identified as requiring interventions in order for Guyana to have an effective human capital development effort that would transform the nation's knowledge base, skill sets, and attitudes, particularly among our youth population. Mr. Speaker, the history of the education sector suggests that the identifying weaknesses in key academic areas, such as English, maths, and sciences, unprepared sector staff, inadequate infrastructure, and equipment, can be remedied by time and money, given the cultivating strengths and opportunities. By the same token, history suggests that mere time and money will not remove or even reduce the threats, such as inherent inefficiency and ineffectiveness. There are also diverse distractions that may lead to dispersions of positive energy and the other challenges that have stymied progress, and all of which are more likely to be effectively addressed through significant behavioral change in diverse groups. Mr. Speaker, Effecting significant behavioral change in education would require reorientation, retraining, attitudinal shifts, shifts in perceptions, public education, socio-political dialogue and discussion, accommodation, and acceptance of diversity in thinking and doing. Effecting such change would require even more time and funds, and would not be a purely linear technical process with relative predictable input and output relationships. Mr. Speaker, additionally, several of the non-school-based interventions, which also have to be implemented to allow for a more holistic approach, I'm on record of saying, and I repeat again, that the people of this country have every right to believe in a better life as we proceed to develop our nation from year to year and from administration to administration. Along the way on this journey, Mr. Speaker, there have been and will always be highs and lows, twists and turns, but that is life. It is how we respond as a country that will determine the efficiency, efficacy, and effectiveness of the leadership which is brought to bear on our circumstances, whatever they may be. Mr. Speaker, I am saying today that special emphasis must be placed on our most vulnerable children, and we must take every opportunity afforded to reach those furthest behind first. And I will deal with that a little more aptly later in my presentation. I have to say that the coalition is proud of its record in the education sector, and I stand here today to defend that. School attendance and schools performance improved as a result of the initiatives such as the public education transportation system, which was aimed at combating high truancy and dropout rates by providing boats, buses, bicycles, and also the public education nutrition service, which we call here school feeding, provided breakfast to our children. Mr. Speaker, we must leverage the gains we have made as a country. That's right. We cannot rest, and we should not rest as a nation until every child's need is addressed and every child's potential is fulfilled. The Coalition Decade of Development Plan for Education adumbrated the need to transform the education sector into a vibrant, viable 21st century, ready and able to support national development and to afford the opportunity of every Guyanese to benefit from an education of the highest quality. Some of the policy shifts, Mr. Speaker, as they currently are, will not allow us to realize these aspirations. I have to draw attention to the information such as the Inter-American Development Bank report, which highlights that although enrollment at the primary and secondary level continues to be relatively high, the quality of schooling varies as our children's performance at the Caribbean Examination Council is below Caribbean average. Similarly, we must not dismiss nor take lightly the World Bank's concern that due to the pandemic, student engagement has been lowered in Guyana, leading to concerns of learning losses. It is further projected, Mr. Speaker, that these losses and dropout rates will have great implications for the accumulation of human capital in countries. Mr. Speaker, in light of this projection, the education sector should outline in its 2022 program the strategic interventions that can avert the great implications. Central to such an intervention should be a national human capital development scheme. And the coalition is proposing that this national human capital development scheme addresses a key strategic aspiration that must be achieved if Guyana is to remain viable even after the oil and gas era. And more importantly, if Guyanese are to be competitive in and outside of Guyana. A national human capital development scheme is a public good that generates significant returns at individual, household, community, and national levels. The proposed National Human Capital Development Scheme is intended to fast-track the recapitalization of our human capital base, which in turn fuels public education. Mr. Speaker, this has two critical dimensions, speed and reach, both of which will anticipate and address national demand for post-secondary expertise. Thus, the Human Capital Scheme would, one, move 100% of our children through all stages of basic education. Secondly, it will ensure 100% of children earn a terminal secondary credential, whether it be CSEC, CAPE, or GCSE, or whatever its equivalent. Thirdly, it will move 100 secondary school graduates through some form of post-secondary education, whether academic, professional, technical, or vocational. Fourthly, it will move 90% of holders of bachelor's degree to some form of postgraduate or specialized academic, professional, or technical education, including terminal professional degrees. Number 5, it will move 80% of graduates of holders of master's degrees to doctoral degrees, and it will ensure and it should ensure all public servants earn a specified number of hours of continuing education for an agreed period. And finally, if we look at number 3, 4, and 5, which together are essential to maintain, sustain, and enhance the education and training of Guyanese, they are not standalone interventions, and they should intersect and interact with all other initiatives. While there is no mention in the budget, Mr. Speaker, to indicate how the licensing of teachers will be operationalized, it is something that was publicized by the Ministry of Education to be undertaken in 2022. And of course, it is one of the recommendations that came out of the Education COI Commission by the coalition. In this regard, the coalition proposes that a national evaluation, licensing, and certification system be established. As the proposed national evaluation, licensing, and certification system will provide the platform and means to support professional associations, establish standards and mechanisms for evaluation, licensing, and certification in line with international standards and best practices. Mr. Speaker, this will also allow for better stakeholders' engagement and knowledge management that will be integral to operationalizing the plan, and it will enhance professionalism across the productive sector and support professionals and remain current in their profession. The National Evaluation, Licensing, and Certification System can also provide support for the review and audit of standards and procedures for self-evaluations and preparation for accreditation. I trust that we will get a better understanding of this important initiative when the subject minister delivers her presentation. I'm calling on the government that, given Guyana's new economic realities and the fact that there are still dense but significant pockets of this population who cannot afford to support their family's education, I can tell you it will take more than cash transfer transfers to improve access to quality education. Mr. Speaker, in 2022, this coalition is calling on the government to relook at its program and ensure more targeted interventions are included as we understand the benefits of public education transportation service and public education nutrition service that provided our children with breakfast. And Mr. Speaker, we understand that these have far-reaching effects, and they're also evidence-based. According to the United Nations, there is evidence to show that public education nutrition service programs enhance enrollment in school and better educational outcomes. I wish to add that increased educational achievement will improve students' potential future productivity and earnings, all of which are important to a good life. Let me remind members in this honorable House that it was the coalition in 2018 for the first time in over a decade that reintroduced training about our teachers in Region 8. I listened then to my colleague, who is now the Minister of Education on the other side of the House, saying that 77% of trained teachers would not help us. Today, that honorable member is singing a different tune because she's in a different seat. I have to say that the literature is replete with evidence of the benefits of having trained teachers in classrooms. This measure will not only help us, but would also ensure that all of our regions throughout the length and breadth of Guyana are reached. I'm happy to see that this measure to widen the breadth and scope of teachers' training is still on the cards. Mr. Speaker, our collective efforts should always be to put the people first. I realize, perhaps more than many others, that transforming the education system will not be easy, and that we are likely to encounter a lot of challenges along the way. And so I had a lot of fixing to do as a minister and a member of the coalition. And we had to make things more appropriate. We had to ensure that they reach acceptable standards, such as we know the fixing of the Cato Secondary School. Let me say it to the people of this country, and I wish to repeat, whether you live in Lethem or Linden, Babu John or Coven John, they all benefited from the coalition's holistic plan in education. Transforming the education system is a necessary journey that we all have to take as one people, one nation, with one destiny. Mr. Speaker, there must be continuity for maximum efficacy. It was during the coalition's term in office that for the first time in over a decade, we conducted a condition survey of all of our schools across this country. And we used that data for maintenance and infrastructural works to be undertaken by the Ministry of Education. We need another survey, Mr. Speaker. In keeping with international best practices for a high-performing education system, the Ministry of Education needs to continue to prioritize special education needs. As numerous children in this country were needlessly enduring the horror of academic underperformance due to lack of appropriate cognitive, social, and emotional support, care, and treatment options. The evidence is saying to us that these conditions are treatable and perhaps preventable. And with early diagnosis and treatment, we need to pay attention to that cohort of students. And it is for that reason in 2018 that the coalition under my stewardship outfitted the newly constructed Special Education Diagnosis and Assimilation Center at Turkine with appropriate equipment and furnishing. For much too long, Mr. Speaker, because of the absence of a specific diagnostic and assimilation facility, Many of our children were left to develop into full-blown conditions at a tremendous personal cost and at a society loss in later years. Mr. Speaker, the education sector must go into every community and reach those students requiring special education needs, because they were put at a further disadvantage due to the pandemic. As I've always posited, another strategic and operational shift required to achieve the vision of first-class education in Guyana is the strengthening of the technical and vocational education, particularly in our hinterland regions. And that is why in 2018, the coalition initiated construction of technical and vocational education and training hubs at Bina Hill, Madhya, Letem, and Mabruma to bridge the gap between hinterland and coastland, while enhancing hinterland access to post-secondary education opportunities. Speaking of post-secondary opportunities, Mr. Speaker, the modernization of the University of Guyana must continue to be a priority for this country. I have to say here that when we came into government as a coalition, even the University of Guyana's most ardent supporters would have admitted that the university was in danger of stagnation. To bring a sense of pride and augustness to this institution, we have, among other things, Mr. Speaker, accomplished in 2017 the regional accreditation of the medical school, and this was long overdue. We will, on this side of the House, continue to advocate for alignment along the entire education value chain as we harness our resources. And as I seek to wind up my presentation, Mr. Speaker, please allow me to quote one of the world's greatest political icons of this 21st century. It will be the great Nelson Mandela who said, "What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we have made in the lives of others that will determine the significance of the life we live." Mr. Speaker, there's a lot of work to be done in the education sector, with the sole purpose of making a difference in the lives of the people in this country. The people in this country are looking at you, and they are counting on us. As a responsible government, it is your duty to make the difficult strategic decisions, and we as a country will have to continue to find innovative solutions to close the gaps and reduce the disparities in education. For us on this side of the House, every child matters. And it is for that reason that we have, among other things, provide direct and targeted services. I would refer to the boats, the buses, and the bicycles that were provided to some of our most disadvantaged communities, such as Pomeroon, Baracaro, Riverview, Bartica, Maracaibo, where our children are at greatest risk of being left behind. Mr. Speaker, I still remember vividly the example I shared as a minister of that child in Baracaro whose parent under the coalition was saving $5,000 a week in transportation costs by traveling daily to and from school in a David G. boat, and who, after benefiting also from breakfast at a cost of approximately $1,000 a day, when you looked at it total, it represented more than $40,000 a month. Call it what you may, it is a measure. And it is measures such as these that will mitigate against perpetual intergenerational cycles of disadvantage. As a sector, education needs to seriously address the structural determinants of inequality, which includes poverty, deficient policies, and inefficient delivery of systems that prevent our children from realizing their full potential. As I conclude my presentation, Mr. Speaker, allow me to place on record a few thank yous. In light that this is my final budget presentation in this honorable House, of course, I begin by thanking none other than His Excellency former President Granger, who reposed in me the confidence to serve in this honorable House. I am forever grateful to the people of this country who afforded me the opportunity to serve them with professionalism, dignity, and accountability. I thank the coalition partners, Kemraj, for their unwavering support and guidance. I thank the former opposition leader, my friend and colleague, the Honorable Joseph Harmon, for his unwavering support. I thank each and every member in this honorable House for the commitment and dedication they bring each and every day, sometimes under the most difficult of circumstances. I thank my family who has always held my back and who has supported every decision I have made. And so today, it is with those words that I part company and I conclude my contribution to Budget 2022. I thank you.